Good morning and welcome to this Real Estate Investors Forum. We welcome you on behalf of AREF and Property Match, and obviously Melville at the Real Estate Investors Forum. We want this morning's event to be a collaborative and interactive event, so please do use the question and answer function at the bottom of your screen, bottom right hand side. You can ask any questions and raise discussion points in that tab. The webinar is being recorded this morning for those that can't attend, so it will be available on the AREF website. I guess with that, I will pass over to our host for today, Melville.
Sam, thank you, and hello to all of you. Diversity and inclusion present enormous challenges to our society. As the UK regulators indicate, diversity and inclusion, or D&I, are vital elements of a healthy culture, can bring fresh thinking to decision-making and improve business performance. Our webinar explores D&I from the perspective of indirect investors and real estate. What are the current shortcomings? How do we address the challenges? As Sam mentioned, we very much welcome your contribution. So do, during the discussion, contribute with your questions or comments. We recognize that views expressed are personal and not representative of one's organization. The presenters have kindly agreed that their slides may be shared with you after the event. AREF, Investors Forum, Property Match will make available these slides to you. We're privileged to have eminent presenters. Anne Bream, a member of AREF's D&I Task Force and Head of Investment Strategy for Real Estate at Aberdeen. First, Helen Price, part of Brunel's Diversity Project Steering Committee. Helen co-leads the Asset Owner Diversity Group. Helen, over to you.
Thank you, Melville. It's great to be here today. As indicated, I co-chair the Asset Owner Diversity Working Group, and I'd like to provide an overview of the charter that's been developed today. First slide, please. So the Asset Owner Diversity Working Group is made up of UK asset owners who came together to formalise a set of actions that asset owners can commit to in order to improve diversity in all of its forms across the investment industry. So not just looking at gender, but all diverse areas. The aim of the project is threefold: to encourage asset owners to signal the importance of diversity inclusion to managers, to improve transparency and standardisation of diversity data, and to ultimately improve diversity inclusion across the industry. Next slide, please. Before covering the aims of the Charter in more detail, I thought it would be useful to take a step back and look at the state of play in the industry. The investments industry is lacking in diversity across multiple fronts, across gender, ethnicity, and socioeconomic backgrounds. And despite various initiatives over the years, the progress is really slow. And it's an increasing problem for the industry as others become more diverse in the risk of poaching from the industry and a lack of diverse thought and progress being made. Next slide, please. Due to the lack of progress that's being made, it's coming under increasing view of the regulators, and there's a risk of increasing regulation in the industry. The FCA is currently consulting on proposals to boost disclosure of diversity on listed company boards and executive committees. The FCA, PRI and Bank of England have issued a discussion paper specifically focused on the financial sector and are looking to issue a full consultation in January next year. including certain measures as to whether they need to introduce quotas, what disclosure is required, and whether they even block senior hires. And they've indicated that they expect to see diversity and inclusion become part of how they regulate and part of how the UK financial sector does business. We're also seeing increased regulation across the board in other areas. Recently, the SEC approved new NASDAQ board diversity and disclosure listing rules. And the reason it's important that I highlight these is for some of the financial firms, they are listed on the exchanges and will therefore be required to follow these disclosure requirements. Next slide, please. The Charter was launched at the beginning of August this year, with signatories representing over £1 trillion in assets under management or consultants. In addition to the signatory list, we have 5 consultants who've committed to adopt the diversity questionnaire the Charter developed. I'll cover this in a moment. And we're currently working on a phase 2 signatory list now. Next slide, please. So the Asset Owner Diversity Charter commits signatories to 3 key asks. The first is manager selection, ensuring that diversity inclusion is incorporated into the tender process and that it is part of the scored criteria. Also ensuring that data disclosure is included in investment management agreements. The second is manager monitoring, ensuring that they are monitoring diversity on an ongoing basis, and all signatories commit to using the diversity questionnaire that's been developed. And lastly, leadership and collaboration, so getting more asset owners involved in the discussions and identifying best practice. Next slide, please. So I mentioned that we've developed a questionnaire. The questionnaire has 2 elements, qualitative and quantitative sections, where that we are aware that obviously for smaller managers, data disclosure can be a problem. And so the qualitative section allows them to tell the story of what areas of diversity they're tackling and what progress has been made over the prior 12 months. Questionnaires seek to understand how firms are addressing their individual barriers. We recognise that there are a lot of questions within it, and in the first year there will be gaps, and over time the disclosures will improve. We're aiming to drive standardisation, so all signatories are committed to use the questionnaire in its entirety, and we're also working with platform providers to drive standardisation, and we've currently got 3 that have confirmed that they will be making it freely available to both asset managers and asset owners, and we continue to work with the industry to drive this even further. Next slide, please. So alongside the Charter, we've developed a number of tools to support signatories. We have a toolkit which includes example tender questions, example due diligence practice, links to resources, and various initiatives that signatories can get involved with. We've also got the questionnaire that's freely available on the Diversity Project website, who are kindly hosting on behalf of the group, and a list of frequently asked questions. As I've mentioned, we are continuing to drive standardisation and currently seeking additional signatories to the Charter. Thank you for allowing me to cover it today, Melville. I'll now pass over to Amberine, who will be able to provide updates on their areas of work.
Thanks, Helen. So my section really, I'll just firstly introduce myself as a kind of brief, although I'm strategy and head of strategy at Aberdeen. I also sit on our PLC Diversity and Inclusion Committee, and I chair the Investments Diversity and Inclusion Forum within the Aberdeen business. So I'm motivated on this topic, and hopefully that helps me share some of the experience from a PLC and investment perspective to the team. So I also sit on the board of AREF, and hence was keen to play a role in the task force that AREF have set up. I don't chair that group, so I'm really just here to represent the views of that team and some of the work we've started to take on. It's a relatively new group. It was established this year. So the slides really are mapping out our desires and an initial set of subjects that we're looking to tackle. So if we move on to the next slide, obviously we started day one within the group just understanding the scope. And within that, there's an awful lot of activity in this space and an awful lot of discussion. And we thought, well, very carefully about the role that AREF might play in terms of the member funds. So obviously, to monitor and discuss any regulatory developments would be critical, and that would be a critical role that AREF could play on behalf of the member funds. And think about the potential impact of that regulation on the funds and potentially, you know, developing best practice. So I think we were clear on that. We also were clear that we may well have to undertake some, you know, bespoke and specific research, or actually gain some specialist advice on certain topics, which we may well in the future seek the approval of the AREF Management Committee for. And then more simply than that, actually to provide some explanation and material that can be used and disseminated amongst our members. And then in addition to that, you know, one of the areas where AREF has been incredibly successful historically is on measurement and benchmarking. So there's no reason why this couldn't extend to the measurement and benchmarking of D&I issues and data, which all maps into defining best practice. So I think the group's quite clear on its scope, but if we move to the next slide, that may well be the case, but this is a big topic with no shortage of areas to delve into. So we understood day one, where can we as a group focus? You know, each one of these areas could take 100% of our focus. But we then decided to narrow down this incredibly wide topic into 3 work streams. So the first work stream of which, and I'll move to the next slide, is looking at social mobility, which the collective group within the D&I group, we felt this was critical to the industry, social mobility. And that's focusing partly at the grassroots level. So those new recruits into our industry, how we can widen those recruits, you know, socially and, you know, from different cultural backgrounds and different educational backgrounds. So we felt this was pretty critical in achieving some of the longer term aims of our members. And then as part of that, the recruitment. So the recruitment's not just about the who, but the how, and how we think about interviewing different social economic groups and adapting interviewing and diversifying the interview panel, for example, and how that can be quite positive and influential in the outcome. And we've also talked about potentially a property boot camp, so broadening out the understanding of our industry, because we feel, and I think probably many of the members will feel the same way, there's a lack of understanding and you know, appreciation of the industry and its role both in the economy and in financial markets. And if we broaden out that knowledge and share information, it could be extremely aspirational, and then in turn leads to more diversity of the workforce and education. Reverse mentoring, I'm sure many people in the group and the audience have grappled with this. I think it's absolutely critical to achieving any success in any of the areas that we might discuss. But it's how you apply that and what you do with that going forward. I think that's important. So social mobility is one of the work streams. Another work stream, if we move to the next slide, is looking at best practice guides and understanding and aggregating, you know, industry knowledge, industry achievement on parental leave and return to work. So we can do that as an organisation, AREF, and we're best placed to do that for the real estate fund industry. Should we be considering the gender pay gap? There is information out there already, but that information is perhaps at a different level to what might be distinctly relevant to our industry. And then, you know, unconscious bias training, understanding and educating through podcasts on various different, you know, levels of work of people in the industry. So not just the, you know, the CEO level, but actually all the way through, I think will help both encourage, you know, encourage new members into the industry, but also encourage progression within the industry. And then we've talked quite a lot actually about learning resources, and this is important, especially when you think about some of the messages that Helen's already given us and some of the initiatives. You know, there's a lot of information out there, and sometimes I suspect our members don't know where to turn to find that information. So as an organisation, we felt that we could have a better resource library for our members to share information in that clarity around about best practice, if you like. So the final work stream for now with this group is about data and measuring data. Now, we all spend an awful lot of time talking about data on the subject of diversity and inclusion because it's critical. It's critical to understand progress and to measure progress. So we've talked within the group so far about surveys. We're all very focused on survey fatigue, which is happening across the industry generally. Should we add some additional questions to the quarterly fund questionnaire, because that's an established survey of sorts, if you like? So do we just add additional questions? I'd be interested if there's any feedback on that from the audience. And then obviously, looking at including objectives and guidance into the code of practice. So that's if you like, our 3 work streams for today. And I think probably what we benefit from within AREF, although it's a relatively new group, if we move to the next slide, we do have the additional benefit of AREF's partnership with the Investment Association. And as a result of that, they have an established, they've made great strides already in this space. And in addition to that, if we move to the next slide, they have, fed back on consultations already underway, the Bank of England and FCA, and we can benefit from that. We can, if you like, piggyback on that as a real estate component of the financial sector. And also the Investment Association have an incredibly successful group called Investment 2020, which I'm sure you've heard of before, which again have made really positive strides in educating and understanding. In fact, there was a really interesting article, if you get a chance to look at it, I would recommend it, on neurodiversity that the Investment Association released, I think it was last week, looking at, for example, autism in the workforce and different techniques and the ability to lead and manage and optimise output from a diverse workforce. So there's lots of information that we can tap into from AREF's perspective through our association with the IA. So within our group, we're keen on doing that. So not reinventing the wheel, but building on the work that's already been done and how we can apply that to our members within AREF. So that was really all I was going to say as a kind of brief introduction, Melville. So I'm quite happy to pass over to you, because I think the interesting part of this presentation will be the discussion.
Yeah, absolutely. And terrific from both Helen and Anne. The analysis of, I'm just so impressed with the workload in relation to what Helen has focused more generally in the fund industry, and the task force within AREF, its sense of ambition. So yes, the discussion is key to exploring issues, and it's nice to see that some questions already coming through. Let's look at the first challenge, one of barriers. Helen, what do you consider to be the barriers to greater D&I within the funds industry generally? And Helen, after you, maybe Anne can comment from a real estate perspective.
So I think there's a number of challenges faced by the investment industry. The first, which some of the initiatives Anne mentioned tackle, are around sort of hiring practices and sort of a lack of exposure to the industry. So trying to get people from more diverse backgrounds to become aware of the industry by using things such as mentoring and sponsorship and reaching out to different universities and colleges to ensure that people are aware of the opportunities within the investments industry. At the moment, we're still pretty much drinking from the same pool in terms of where we're hiring individuals from, and we really do need to expand that and further grow that. And there are some great initiatives that are tackling that. I think the second big barrier is around culture and retention. Work-life balance is often cited as an issue within the industry. I'm sure many of you have seen some of the media coverage over the summer of analysts working 100-hour weeks, and the outcome to tackle that was to increase pay rather than maybe tackling some of the work-life issues that persist. And we are starting to see some areas addressing that. So, you know, COVID and having to work from home will undoubtedly help with flexible working arrangements within the industry. We're now seeing more managers offering enhanced parental leave and equalising this across all of their employees. That are helping to look at that. But there's also a lack of representation. As an example, 80% of media quotes are from men. And so there's lots of different barriers that are being faced, and each corporate and organisation will need to identify the barriers that they face and how they can bring these down.
Excellent. Anne?
No, I mean, I would agree with much of what Helen said there. I think probably just bringing it to life with some examples. So the recruitment point, I think, is very, very valid on, you know, if we take, for example, our graduate recruitment, and in the real estate industry, there aren't that many universities that offer the real estate degree. So you're naturally focused down one or two or three, you know, routes. And we've recognised that, and we've recognised that that actually then can result in a much less diverse pool of graduates coming into the business. So what we've done for certain roles is specifically not gone down the route of those universities, so i.e. not stipulating real estate experience, because actually at that level it might not necessarily be necessary. Perhaps more necessary is someone that's an expert on Power BI or you know, Python coding, you know, someone who can actually come in and transform some of our data collection, etc. So we've done that recently on a recruitment where we broadened it out to non-real estate experience, and the pool was much more diverse. You know, from actually all areas, not just social, you know, from ethnicity perspective and gender perspective, we had a much broader pool of graduates, which I was really pleased about. So I think that's something in the industry we need to consider, and it goes hand in hand with the fact that we may well actually need different skills in the industry going forward, and not necessarily the traditional skills that we had in the past.
Excellent, and useful to give a sense of solutions to be explored. We've had a terrific question from one of the LPs, which Anne, initially you, focusing from real estate. Is there a need for more diversity and inclusion within real estate fund investment committees? And if so, what changes, what solutions should be adopted to achieve more D&I within the ICs? And Helen, maybe you can comment subsequently about the Brunel approach to IC representation.
So I think diversity, ultimately the diversity and investment committee within a business will be determined by how diverse your investment team is, because you can only pull in a certain amount of the team to vote in those committees unless you have some external voting members, which some do and some don't. So I think to pull on the diversity of your team is critical to that. Other than that, I think, you know, ultimately, and I chair many of our committees, it's about diversity of thought, and you can, to a certain extent, program that into your terms of reference. So requiring certain people to be at the table. You can do it in that way if you want, but it doesn't necessarily always achieve the diversity that you're looking to achieve. There's also a big emphasis on the chair to make sure that there's diversity in the room, because ultimately what we're trying to do is to avoid, you know, bias, anchoring, potential conflicts of interest that may not be, you know, obvious to us, and to come to a better outcome for investors. So I think you need a diverse team to be able to achieve that within an investment committee, but there are ways you can formalise it through the terms of your committee. And also, in addition to that, you need to think carefully when you're chairing a meeting that even if you've got a diverse group of people in the room, that everyone gets an equal voice and they feel confident to give that voice. So think about the way people vote, think about the amount of airtime that people get. That's the practical point of view.
So from my perspective, diversity isn't exclusive to any one sector or organisation or group. It's important because it leads to better decision making and economic performance. So we should be striving for diversity in all aspects where possible. Now, obviously, there are different barriers. As Anne pointed out, you are drawing from a smaller pool of people. And if there is a lack of diversity there, then that does hinder what you can do. So approaching inclusivity would be the first step. So ensuring that, as Anne outlined, that there's processes in place to ensure that everyone's got an equal voice and everybody's comfortable being able to voice that opinion, irregardless of different backgrounds or communication styles. And in turn, improving the physical diversity characteristics will help aid with that over time as well.
Excellent. And we've got another very interesting issue. This whole conundrum of self-regulation or mandatory regulation. Helen, you referred to the prospects of the FCA consultation. Anne, to the discussion paper, the consultation for the listed sector. What do you all feel is the way forward self-regulation, or do we need mandatory change? Helen, do you want to start first and then to Anne?
I think that's a really interesting question and one that's probably going to be hotly debated over the next year. If we look at some of the data that's available within the industry, a stat that springs to mind is that women make up just around 17% of FCA approved individuals, and that figure has actually remained remarkably unchanged since 2005. Women in fund management roles reached 11% in 2020, and that was an increase of just 0.7% since 2016. And at the current rates of progress, Citywire are estimating that the promotion rates of women, it will take 2 centuries before female fund managers will see parity with their male colleagues. So whilst the industry has put good initiatives into place, and I think we're actually at a tipping point, the events over the last years have really brought diversity and inclusivity front and centre of mind, and we're seeing some great initiatives. I do think that regulation can help speed things up. And we've seen that with the Hampton-Alexander Review, when they brought in the requirement to have 33% representation of females on FTSE 100 boards. That target was hit last year. And we definitely saw a ramp up in activity, engagement from asset managers and stakeholders in achieving that. So I think hand in hand, they can go well together. We just need to be careful that whatever regulation is set is appropriate and based on sound data and information to ensure we don't have unintended consequences.
So Melva, I'm quite in favour of self-regulation versus mandatory on this topic. And I think the most powerful voice in the room here is our clients. So if our clients are asking and requiring and demanding this of us, it will happen, regardless of whether we have regulation in this space. And that's what's been this sort of sea change over the last year I've seen in the business, the volume of questions we have on the RFPs that we receive, you know, the questioning that we have when we're speaking to clients face to face. That to me is one of the major instigators of change. And I think, you know, the other side of the coin is that we're a competitive bunch in the financial sector, and we like to see our nail up in lights that we have, you know, the greatest percentage of fund managers that are females, you know, the highest level of diversity. So I think, and that goes hand in hand with clients, and that's the reason why. So I would be fearful that mandatory might result in the wrong outcome. So I go back to that point where, you know, we went to recruit recently for some graduates, and we recognised it was a very undiverse pool when we did a first screening. And then we recognised we needed to do another screening to increase that diversity, and we did. And we had a fantastic outcome from that. However, if we were mandated to do that and the pool wasn't broader, then do we recruit the right person into the role? I think it's a question mark. So I think I think self-regulation can get us where we want to be, but more importantly is the demands of clients and the expectations of clients.
Oh, excellent. Helen recognizing that mandatory change may be necessary, but equally Anne emphasizing the power of capital. The likes of Brunel and the other organizations, LGPS's institutional investors, being part of the asset diversity group is just tremendous in making that sense of competitiveness into this arena and facilitating change. We've had a terrific, very short question, very pointed, because often in this agenda of D&I, it's targets, quotas. What's your preference, targets or quotas? Helen, first.
So I think actually both serve a purpose in where they're applied. So to give an example, as Anne mentioned, when you're shortlisting for interviews or you're looking at your interview panel, quotas can really help with bringing in a diverse range of candidates into your shortlisting, and also having quotas on your interview panel can influence the outcome of decisions and remove unconscious bias. So quotas have a part to play in that sense, and tend to be the more preferred option than setting explicit targets to ensure that the unintended consequences don't result. So as Anne pointed out, you want to improve the diversity, but you don't want to push people to hiring the wrong people for the role. You still need to ensure that the candidates that you are hiring are fit for purpose, can bring a range of skills and knowledge to the organisation that will help develop it, rather than hiring on a basis of a characteristic. So I think they both serve their purpose. Obviously, we're all in favour of not regulating where possible, but we have seen it have significant impact. As I previously mentioned with the Hampton-Alexander Review, it can help speed that process along.
So I probably, not to duck the question, Melville, but I suppose where I feel most strongly, and I think in our business, which is most important, is actually it's about measurement of progress. I think that's the most important, because it does, whether it's a target or a quota, we do have quite considerable variation between different parts of the industry. So I think to set a target or have a quota, either or, it's about your progress towards that, and the way to encourage that is to measure the progress and to make it fully embedded in, for example, our performance measurement internally and our overall business success metrics. So I think I'm a big fan of measurement and progress towards targets and quotas.
Yeah, excellent from both of you, and a useful comment from the audience that it's ambition. It's about shared goals, and that's what comes across from both of you. We've had another interesting issue, which Anne, this crossover between the listed and the unlisted sector. There's been reference to the proposal in terms of the listed sector and diversity on boards. Should the equivalent be applying in the unlisted sector? And then, Helen, it'll be interesting to hear your views.
I mean, I can't think of any reason why it shouldn't. So I from my perspective, I think the reality is that, so obviously, like I said at the beginning, I sit on the PLC level on our diversity and inclusion, and also on our investment side. So, the targets and ambitions at a PLC level, etc. But also we manage a host of private funds and unlisted funds. So the level of ambition at the PLC should never be any different to what it is in terms of the unlisted environment. And as a business, that's the way we're structured. So we're not looking at just having some sort of a high-level target. It has to permeate all the way through the business. And we also invest into listed companies in the real estate sphere, and we assess and score companies on that basis. So how could we do that if we're not assessing ourselves on that basis?
I echo Anne's comments. I agree that that it would be great to see it across both avenues. I'm actually just reflecting on the previous question around targets. It was something we discussed as we were developing the diversity charter and the questionnaire. So which sectors do we apply the questionnaire to? And we'll be requiring that across all of our asset managers, and came to the conclusion that we didn't think targets was targets was the right thing to set, because it's about data disclosure, greater transparency, having an engaged conversation between the asset owner and the asset manager about where are you currently, what is your strategy, and how are you seeking to break down the barriers that you as an organisation face. So yes, we would welcome greater disclosure across both avenues.
Excellent to have a sense of direction from both of you on that issue. We've got another interesting question from the audience. Would you support blind recruitment? Anne, and then Helen?
Yeah, so we've successfully used blind recruitment as part of our process. And we actually did that because we'd advertised for a role. It was, I think it was in our Paris office, and we felt that the applications that came back were particularly undiverse. So we decided that we were going to start again, and we took a blind recruitment approach, and it was very, very successful. And I hate to bring this back to practicalities, but in another role that we advertised for, which was a London-based role recently, we wanted to use blind recruitment, but we got more than 100 applications for that role. And actually, practically speaking, we needed some software to help us with that. So, the way that we would historically do it is we would ask our HR department to strip out any personal, etc. But to do that with over 100 applications, practically speaking, is a bit tricky. So what we've come to the conclusion is we need some software to help us do that in the future, which we'll be looking for. So yeah, the other thing I would add to that, we're talking about blind recruitment, but also diverse interview panels as well, which is something that we've rolled out, which I think is, and Helen's touched on that, which is equally important.
So I'm no HR expert and don't get involved in some of the recruitment processes as much as some of my other colleagues. But the research shows that introducing blind recruitment can remove some of the unconscious bias that exists. And I think it's down to each company to identify the positives and negatives involved with a blind recruitment process and whether it works for them. So to highlight potentially some of the pitfalls, as well as sort of the use of resource, is that blind recruitment can hinder cognitive diversity and the difference in thinking and personality traits that come through to see how that person might fit into the culture and diversify that culture may be less prevalent through some blind recruitment. So you may need to take phased or stepped approach to ensure that you're getting the best diversity possible through your recruitment process. But research certainly indicates that it does help remove some of those barriers.
Very useful to have your insights. We're getting a stream of questions coming in, so I'm kind of bundling them. Inevitably, with the D&I challenges, there can be the counterside who are threatened. Let's take the example of gender diversity. Why should gender diversity be important to men? Helen, and then Anne.
To simply put it, gender diversity impacts men as well as women. So greater gender diversity would lead to better health outcomes for both men and women. To give some examples, men have a lower life expectancy. They account for 2/3 of suicides in the UK since the mid-1990s. And in the US, they're the most in-debt, obese, addicted, and medicated cohort in history. By creating better equality across male and females, it will lead to better life expectancy and better health across both genders. It will lead to better relationships. So I mentioned previously, for example, that we've seen a wave of investment managers equalising their family leave policies. Historically, in the UK, for example, men are only entitled to 2 weeks statutory leave. I personally think that's appalling. And you know, greater gender diversity would lead to better leave offering for men, better family time, better time with their partners, better health of relationships, and that in turn leads to their overall better health. And then from a workplace perspective, it leads to better perspective and ideas and generation within the workplace. And ultimately, men know women just as much as women know women. So their relations, their mothers, their daughters, their sisters, their aunts will all be impacted by the inequalities that still persist.
So, I mean, I can only add some experience to what Helen said, because I completely agree. I think ultimately better decisions and better performance for clients, but actually the impact on culture, business culture, is massive. And I'll point to a couple of things recently that I can refer to Aberdeen as an example, where the working environment over the last year has equalised males and females massively in the business, because shared parental responsibility, you know, homeschooling, having to accommodate working patterns for both the males and females in the household, or, you know, just understanding the different challenges of life. That I think's helped. But also we introduced a parental leave policy for our teams before COVID, so our equalising and giving a year's parental leave, and that's had such a huge impact on the team, and I can see it already even in the space of a year. Not only from the perspective of understanding you know, roles in families and roles in households, but also, interestingly, where a great number of the males have taken up the opportunity, it also gives opportunity for other members of the team to step up when they're on parental leave. It allows more progression, and you know, people to have a different, you know, the light to shine on people, if you like. So it's been really positive for us in that sense.
Terrific, and it's useful to have those insights, Anne, from the COVID lockdown, and Helen, you recognizing the statistics, which is this applies equally as challenges to men as women. It's great to see the questions coming in, and unfortunately we're now timed out. We will try to address these questions following the webinar, and thank you for the engagement to the audience, but particularly to our terrific presenters. We've covered a range of issues, and from Helen had that wider perspective, combined with Anne with a focus on what AREF strategically is planning, and the real estate perspective. If we were to meet in person, it would be an immense thank you. I'm sure all of you would be applauding as I express my gratitude to them. Can I now round out by saying thank you to our participants. We look forward as an investor group to combining. 20th of October, AREF will have an investor event where Peter Martin will be presenting with Paul Richards. So feel free to join that event, whether or not you are an AREF investor member. So any other investors who are interested, please contact AREF or even myself. And then secondly, our three organizations, Property Match, Investors Forum, and AREF, we plan our next quarterly meeting in the traditional form in January when we look ahead. So we will be in contact with you then for that event. In the meantime, another excellent thank you to both Helen and Anne for their terrific contributions. We wish you all a most enjoyable day and look forward to connecting with you in due course. So thank you for joining this webinar. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You.